My pleasure to speak to Bill 34 today. Of course, everybody in this chamber and everybody through Ontario recognizes the travesty and the injustice that happened back in Toronto during the G20 summit when this government passed a regulation in secret when the House was not in session, and which led to such a travesty of injustice due to the chaos and the complications of that regulation that was passed. And although there was much hiding and running away from blame during that whole chaotic period of time, the Ombudsman did I think a very fine job in reviewing that travesty and providing a number of recommendations. And I am very pleased to see that this government has indeed taken steps in their Bill 34 to minimize the opportunities for that sort of injustice to happen again. Although they've taken steps in that direction, they have not gone far enough, in my view, Speaker. We know that had the government of the day followed the rules of the day, the rules that regulations must be clear and unambiguous, and that they ought to be done in openness and with transparency. If they had followed that rule of the day, we would not have seen the chaos and the injustice that followed during the G20 summit. Now, I know there's been a number of recommendations by the Ombudsman. His recommendation number 3 has not been addressed by this new bill in front of the House. And there's actually no mention of it at all in the bill. And the Ombudsman's recommendation is that the Ministry should develop a protocol that would call for public information campaigns when police powers are modified by subordinate legislation, particularly in protest situations. There's not any mention of that. And again, I think all members of the House would recognize that that was indeed a significant failing of that G20 regulation. So the Ombudsman recommendation that proper communication is put forward is silent in Bill 34. And I have to, this bill still allows for regulations to be developed under Bill 34. For example, the creating of anybody to be a peace officer with the authorities under Bill 34. It still allows that to be done through order in council, and it allows it to be done without legislative oversight. Now, of course, they're supposed to follow the rules. But we saw during the G20, they didn't follow the government. The government of the day did not follow their own rules. Will they follow the rules under Bill 34? I'm not sure. I don't think anybody can be sure. Because we've seen, this is the irony in this, Speaker, is the laws are passed to punish lawbreakers. What happens when the lawmakers break their own laws? And that's what happened with G20. The government of the day did not provide a clear, unambiguous regulation. They hid from it. And they didn't tell anybody about it. And we had the minister at the time, Minister Bartolucci, we had the chief of police, we've had the federal ministers. Nobody knew what anybody was doing. And in the process, over 1,000 innocent people were rounded up, had their freedoms removed, incarcerated. Was a number of truly abusive situations that came forward. And a handful of the hoodlums did get caught. I don't know how many more got away. But that's what happens when you create a situation of chaos and confusion. But once again, the lawmakers didn't even follow their own rules. And I don't believe anybody in this legislature would believe that it was an oversight or it was misfortune that that regulation was done in the fashion it was done when it was introduced, when the House was not in session, when it was gazetted in darkness. No public scrutiny at all. We knew that that G20 summit was coming long in advance. We knew that the regulation needed to be done up, but it was waited until the House was out of session before that regulation was put forward. Pieces of legislation that grant such authority are necessary, but what is also necessary is the safeguards that they're used judiciously, that they're used cautiously, and that they're done in an open and transparent fashion, so that we do not have thousands of innocent people incarcerated and the hoodlums who get away. That's and I think the Ombudsman's report, and he says here, generally police authority is conferred through enactment of legislation accompanied by the openness, transparency, and accountability inherent in a democratic system of government. There is a real and insidious danger associated with using subordinate legislation passed behind closed doors. We still have that regulatory making authority within this Act. And I don't know when this Act might be used again, when a regulation may be used again, but we know from history now and from experience that some governments will not follow their own laws, will not follow their own rules, and we will not get necessarily that openness and transparency that the Ombudsman so purposely recommended in this legislation. So I would hope and expect that recommendation number 3 is thoroughly discussed at committee, and that there is indeed substantial safeguards included in this legislation, so that if another regulation has to be made under it, that we have indeed legislative oversight and not another travesty that what happened at the G20. Speaker, there's this speaks back to the role of this legislature in all regulations, the very limited opportunities we have as legislators and as members of this House to actually scrutinize the value of the regulations that are passed. I think it's incumbent on all of us to ensure that there are indeed new mechanisms put in place that allows legislators to review all regulations here in this House, have them a good airing, so that we can see either the merit or the incompetence of legislative regulations that are created by order in council and created behind closed doors, and we never get to see them in the light of day until a problem has already been hoisted upon the people of Ontario. There is some changes that could be done in the Regulations and Private Bills Committee to expand the scope of that committee that would have been able to look at this G20 regulation, and I look forward that indeed all members of this legislature see the value in this legislature scrutinizing subordinate regulations. Thank you.
You know, Madam Speaker, I am impressed with the amount of power and authority that the opposition has given this government. We had 20 of the world's leaders, including President Barack Obama, the Prime Minister of Britain. They all came to Toronto. We had the federal government spend $1 billion to welcome them here in gazebos and everything else. We had security from across the nation here. We had the federal government putting together this huge summit. But, Madam Speaker, it wasn't the federal government, according to the opposition. Even though it was an international summit, even though we welcomed these leaders from all around the world, and our Prime Minister was there, and the Governor General was there, and there was federal security and national security, according to the opposition, no, that had nothing to do with them. It was all the fault of the Ontario government. Madam Speaker, we were one piece of a larger security puzzle, a puzzle which was under, as it should have been, appropriately under the umbrella of the federal government.
The member from Lanark, Frontenac, Lennox and Addington, that's probably the start of a very long name for a riding. But he makes a very good point, and I recall he said lawmakers don't even follow their own rules. And that's really the substance of why we're so upset on this side, is in the climate that the previous member spoke about. Yes, it was an important event for Toronto, the top city in Canada, and it was very kind of Harper to allow them to facilitate it. What was left to the police forces in the province of Ontario, which come under the jurisdiction of the province, to arrange the activity? And what Premier McGuinty and his cabinet did is really what's at question here.
And this was an intentional and planned and an abuse of authority and power, and in violation of our rights, in violation of our freedoms, unconstitutional in every way. And it was the provincial government that actually passed the regulation 233-110.
Thank the member from Davenport, Durham, Welland, and of course the Government House Leader for their comments. Clearly the Government House Leader started building that complicated puzzle and still hasn't finished it, and is still very puzzled about the work of the legislature and what his role in it is. Let me clarify, out of the standing orders of this House, what rules this government broke in the enacting of that legislation, that regulation. Regulations, the following principles are laid down to guide the committee in the examination regulations. The regulation should not contain provisions initiating new policy, but should be confined to details to give effect to the policy established in the statute. They should be expressed in precise and unambiguous language. Now, take a look at that regulation. I challenge the member from Guelph who was interjecting earlier to actually read the regulation and see if it is precise and unambiguous. It is absolutely atrocious, Madam Speaker, absolutely atrocious that the member from Guelph, who hasn't read anything, comes in and says that this regulation is good. It is contrary to the standing orders of this House that the regulation is not done in precise and unambiguous language, and there is still nothing in Bill 34 that would compel this government to follow through and protect the rights and freedoms of the citizens and residents of Ontario so that they are not dealt injustice from the hands of government who's there to protect them. I said that this bill takes some important steps. Let's make sure that the steps are complete and the journey is complete.
Further debate?